everybody, I'm Ozo for Dam Connections, and today we are at UPC Agropolis with David from Allora Labs. David, can you tell me a bit more about your project and how you got here?
Very long story, but shortly put, we're a cannabis laboratory, so we test cannabis, we provide data for researchers, but we also want to take an active stance for creating quality products for also the recreative market. We feel this is very sort of a shoved under child in the more scientific world, so we hope to take that as well.
All right, that's very interesting. So let's check out the lab and
Sure thing.
Learn a little more. So here at Allora Labs, one of your main goals is education and harm reduction. How do you intend to do that?
So to cover sort of what we do and how we want to approach all these different issues that we want to address, I would say as a laboratory we test and create the data that then can be used for harm reduction. Okay. So to provide the actual education and the harm reduction, we work with a lot of different people. For example, with energy control here in Spain, and in the Netherlands we work with Allora. He's an expert in the area there. So what we can do is talk with all the clubs, talk with a lot of people, get them to send samples in. Then we test all those samples, we look at what's going on, and then we can sort of create a map of everything that we find. And based on that data and that map, then people can start using it for education, for harm reduction. But the most important thing is first you need to know what harm is being caused.
Yeah.
And then we can look at how can we address that. But luckily enough, there's people that have been doing that for 20 years.
Okay, great.
So they help with the exact education part.
Okay, and so about the harm, what do you see are the main contaminants that you find in cannabis nowadays?
I think this is a very sporadic thing and more going in phases. Like there was a period where also due to Corona there was a lot of issues with getting good quality products, especially in coffee shops and social clubs. So what you could see is that people started getting CBD weed from the legal market and then spraying that with synthetic. But very often it's a phase or it's an event happening for a period of time. And then people sort of catch on to it and things move on to the next thing. It can be very wide. You'll see occasionally PGRs, like growth hormones for the plants. I wouldn't say there's like really extreme things that you would find. Okay. In the end, often the most harmful thing with smoking cannabis is mixing it with tobacco.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Do you find that in places where there's a regulation for consumption, you find that the product is less contaminated? Is there any correlation?
I think it's very hard to say. I think to say something really conclusive, like we would need to do that proper study of finding everything and mapping that out. I think there's both benefits and negatives with both sides of the industry. So for example, what you saw in America is that it started really good, you started getting quality product, but then suddenly there were a lot of companies that didn't make the cut, they didn't get the right certification, so it wasn't good, but then it sort of slides to different markets. That's also something that we noticed in Europe, that suddenly we were getting all sorts of, just different products from America. And something that we found another time was a lot of mold and these kind of things. Yeah. But then the question is as well, like, did that already happen when it was back in America, or did it get shipped in very tight bags, they didn't open it properly, and did it start molding in the bag?
Of course,
so there's a lot of variables to really address the exact issues.
Okay, so you can't really tell if a legal market or black market has better or worse product.
I think when you look at the legal market, I would definitely say, there's regulation, and as long as that regulation is being followed and everyone abides by the proper rules of doing it, it's going to be a good product and better than having it in the black market, definitely. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything in the black market is bad, because there's also people that do it very passionately and in a good way. I think you'll find both good and bad in both markets. Where at least for the legal industry, there is something like, as long as it's by those standards, and that's why we create certification like that, we know it's good.
Okay, yeah.
Where the black market is just a bit more, yeah, you just don't know.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, at your lab you can analyze the contaminants, and I'm wondering also, can you analyze the the cannabinoids and the terpenes, and sort of like from just analyzing a sample define a terpenic profile or such things? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, we got a gas chromatography. So with that we can measure cannabinoids, we can measure terpenes. For extracts, we can also do residual solvents. Say, for example, they made butane extracts, CO2 or ethanol extracts. If they didn't do it properly, you can have some remaining substances in there, and that's definitely something that we can detect. And then, yeah, taking all that data, you can always make that into fancy pictures and make that into a graph or like a circle diagram where you chart out all the different terpenes that you find.
All right. So you can sort of like, by looking at the terpenes and all that, your lab would be able to sort of define how one product would affect a person, or is that way too broad? Like it depends so much on...
Yeah, definitely. I think, I wouldn't say necessarily misconception, but to put it like this, THC it just makes you high. But other than that, it doesn't cause the character of the weed, to put it like that. If you really look at the terpenes and all the therapeutical effects that are there, similar, for example, your grandma might have put some lavender oil on your pillow. Helps you sleep, helps you relax. That's the same thing with cannabis. So if you take a piece of cannabis and you smell the lavender smell, it's very likely that it's going to have these effects. And similar with myrcene, which smells a lot like mango and exotic fruits, it's going to make you sleepy. If you smell the more limonene type of things, that can be more of an upper and active kind of sharpness kind of thing. So you can definitely, by just smelling and knowing what you're smelling and what those different terpenes smell like, you can definitely make sort of an idea that, you know, I'm going to smoke this, I'll probably feel this. Or if I'm going to smoke that weed, then I'll probably feel that.
So we talked about studying the contaminants, studying the cannabinoids, and I was wondering if, in the case where you would want to study like the effects on people, maybe on the neurosystem, on REM sleep or something like that, how would you go about that with like human guinea pigs, and is that legal?
I'm not sure how legal that is, unless you get a proper research license for that. I'm quite sure there is already being done some research about this. But in the end, that's also not really my field. I'm very much on the analytics. I can tell you what it is, and then I give that data to the scientists and the researchers to figure that out for us.
Okay, nice. So when you're analyzing a sample, how extensive can the result actually be, considering that some characteristics depend on the cannabinoids and some depend really on the growing technique?
So usually what we tell the customer is, if you send a sample, then we can be very accurate about that exact sample. But say, for example, if you have a massive grow of 1,000 plants and you're going to send us 0.5 gram of that entire grow, then the question is, how accurate does that one sample represent the entire grow? Maybe, indeed, as you mentioned, growing techniques, maybe half of the plant's got a lot more nutrition than the other. Or even if you have a plant, usually the top has a lot more active ingredients than the bottom. So this is where you have to look at which ways can we use to get a better average of the entire batch. Say, you can use different samples from the same plant, or you can get more plants tested. So it's just a matter of looking at how many plants or how many kilograms of weed do you have, and how many samples should we take from that, and then create an average based on that.
All right, so that's how you would get an accurate result. But then in the end result, how do you know how much has to do with the actual growing technique and how much has to do with the genetic?
This is a very interesting topic that we're still learning a lot about. I also know actually a research project that is looking at the effects of different lights and wavelength, different nutrition. The way, a basic form of putting it is genetics is sort of like the basic blueprint. For example, when you were born, you had your genetics. So it's very unlikely that suddenly 15 years, 20 years later, you're going to be like me.
Yeah.
You know, that's still a very big genetic difference. Where if you look more at, so maybe more easy to understand is say you have the genetics of Northern Lights. This has a specific terpene profile. It has a likelihood to make certain cannabinoids. And within that profile, you can adapt some things with different techniques, with different nutrition, different wavelengths of lights, light cycles, you know, you name it. All these things have different effects on the plant. But then what is decided by what in the end depends on how much different growing techniques you have used. And how in depth you went with it. So it's hard to say exactly. It really depends also on the cannabis product itself. But we're learning a lot about it, and hopefully soon we can give a very decisive answer.
Okay. So yeah, you could study like one grow of like the same phenotype, and you're still going to get like quite different results.
Let's put it like this. If I have CBD weed, where the genetics say, you know, I'm expecting to have 10% CBD and below 0.2% THC, then it's very unlikely that suddenly you would have 10% THC and 1% CBD. But of course, if you really stimulate the growth of the THC from the start, then yeah, you can have a lot more than the 0.2% that it might say initially that you would get. And vice versa with you know, a proper recreative strain or gelato or something. It's not that if you're going to put it in the ground, suddenly there's no THC.
Yeah, of course.
It still wants to do that genetically. But the question then is how much THC will you get? That depends on how much you care for the plant.
Okay. That's really interesting. It's really so many characteristics that you really have to take into account, yeah.
There's a lot to it, yeah, and I think we're also just on, well, the cannabis industry is even though a very old industry, it's still in its baby steps in the modern age.
Yeah.
So there's so much more that we can learn, and so much that we can speculate and go for, definitely.
Yeah, all right, well, thank you so much, David, for your time.
Welcome.
Hope you enjoyed this interview as much as we did. It was really enlightening, really.
Glad to have you over. No, it was cool.
Thank you. And thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked it. Make sure you follow us on Damn Connections Spain and Damn Connections, and see you soon.